Hey guys, thanks so much for joining me today on Dynamo Chats. Today I am super excited because I have one of my favorite people, Jacob Small, and he's going to talk to us today about the new Dynamo. All of the new things, all of the new nodes. I'm really excited about the tune-up that he's going to show us, the ability to show us how long our scripts are taking. We can improve them, make them run super fast, right? You guys watched my last episode. I was actually joking about getting some elevator music incorporated into some of my scripts because sometimes they take a while to run, right? It's like, hey, let me save you a bunch of time by running this Dynamo script that takes 5 minutes. It's going to save you time, but maybe I could, throw in some Mario music or something fun.
But yeah, lots of cool new stuff in the new release. So um, TuneUp is just one of those wonderful assets or aspects. I'm trying to open up a quick sample graph so we can see exactly sort of how that runs. I've got a hotel. It is 16 stories. So lots of rooms, lots of room numbers, but all of those rooms and room numbers don't really have names. The numbers don't necessarily align. Can't really tell kind of, where things are. It's just sort of haphazard, like let's place a room kind of deal as projects often start. So what this Dynamo graph does, and I've been demoing this for a while now, but it's going to rename and renumber all of those rooms. And the way that it does so is kind of slow. So what I want to do is I'm going to come in here. I'm going to say search for a package, and I'm going to install the TuneUp View extension. And this
See,
view
so it
extension,
doesn't just come natively. You got to actually be in the know.
yeah, you got to be in the know to know that it's there and put it
Got it.
together. And this will work with Revit 2021 as well, or Dynamo for Revit 2021 as well. Oh, and of course, I'm getting an error,
It
and it's
wouldn't be
not
a
going to.
demo, a live demo, if you didn't get an error.
Yeah, it's not going to tell me what that error is, and I'm hoping that error is going to say that this file already exists. Yeah, it already existed, so that's why it's
You
not going to
can't
allow me
download
to.
it if you already have it, right?
Exactly, it's like you're not able to overwrite it. But once this is done, you'll get the TuneUp View extension, and there's a few different parts. Basically, what it is every node that I've placed on Canvas shows up in this list here, right? And it's a pretty big list on this graph because I have pretty big graph. When I hit run, it's going to sort of start to populate the order that these have been executed in. And then it's going to tell me how long the individual node managed to execute, as well as give me a total execute time. The other thing that's really cool here is there's this force re-execute button that's going to basically force the entire graph to rerun itself. And that's what I'm going to use to hit, rather than hitting run down here, that's what I'm going to use here. And this is one of those graphs, where, yeah, it's going to take a couple minutes to run all the way through because I'm renaming and renumbering. I think it's like 1,600 rooms or something like that, based on sort of the mailman's path of travel, left side of the hall, right side of the hall. So it's not even as simple as like draw a spline through all the rooms. Well, I've got 16 floors. That's 16 splines I'd have to draw. Ain't nobody got time for that, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and, let some geometry magic and logic do its work. Let this process through. And then after a couple minutes, we'll start to see, what those actual runtimes are. Now, what's interesting about this node or this graph, and I happen to know this because I've done the exploration on this a few times. There's two nodes on this entire graph that are slow. Up until those two nodes, the graph just sort of flies, and we get what we're actually after. And those two nodes, sadly, there's not really a great way around it because it's the door to room from room, and then the room.doors node, right? So when we start to query like big geometrically complex pieces like that, it can be a little bit slow.
Well,
But
not only that, but probably hundreds or 1,000 doors, right? So you're pushing a lot of rooms into a lot of doors, a lot of data is being analyzed,
yeah,
which is awesome.
yeah,
It's exactly
and
what we want.
it's still a great graph, but again, users just have to know it's going to take some time. And what's great about having a view extension like TuneUp here, as soon as it decides it wants to finish up, is I can then come through and sort of understand like, oh, there we go. Let my view refresh. All right, so you can see my guest rooms now 211, 213, 215, 217, 11B, 31B, 15B. So instead of just being named room with kind of a random number all the way through wherever I may be at any particular level of this hotel, we've renamed and renumbered all those rooms. And we won't get too much into the guts of that graph, but
Super
we will talk
intrigued by
about
the logic, though.
well, maybe, I guess we could get into that if you wanted to.
No, we're talking about new Dynamo stuff. That will have to be another one. Guys, let me know in the comments below if you're super interested in Jacob's graph.
Fair enough. So you can see here, I can sort either, by the executed. So this was the last node that was executed. This was the first node that was executed down here. The total runtime was 99,000 milliseconds. So I don't know, somebody can do some math. There's a divide by 60 in there somewhere. If I want to go to a particular node, I can just sort of click on it and it should zoom into that particular piece. There we go. So it's highlighted that node. You can see it there.
That's essential.
That took 7 seconds. This one took 224 milliseconds. All right.
That's something that I would really like to see on the view dependency or the node dependency.
Yes.
Being able to click on it and see where that beaker node is or whatever it is that's labeled there.
Yep.
And, that's great.
Yeah, this is huge, right? Because now we can come through and zoom to that 224 millisecond node or 534. These are starting to look like big numbers, right? But that's still less than half a second, right? So we have to really start to get through and understand what's going on. Okay, 40,000 milliseconds. That one's a little bit slow, right? And this is one of the custom nodes from Clockwork. And honestly, I've recoded this 6 different ways, and each of the 6 times it's wound up that these 2 nodes, as slow as they are still the fastest way to get this done. And that's just sort of the nature of the exercise. But yeah, it's a great way to sort of understand where should I look at making my graph more effective? What can I do to make my graph sort of execute faster? And then the other thing, so this says executed on the current run. If we place a code block, let's say math.randomList n, and then a times 30. So this is going to take a random list of 10 numbers between 0 and 1 and then multiply them by 30. When I hit run here, oh, it's going to re-execute everything. I shouldn't have done that. Never mind. If it didn't require a total refresh because of my earlier Revit element collection, it would just tell me what sort of changed since the previous run. But because I'm modifying rooms and reading them in the same graph, this is going to lock up. So
force close.
Here we go with the task manager.
I think the force re-execute is really awesome. I think the first question I automatically get is there a shortcut key? Because I'm constantly pressing the F5. I guess maybe you could make one.
Yeah, there isn't really one because to the best of my knowledge, you can't really map. I guess you could maybe do something with an auto hotkey, but it's still going to move your mouse around because there isn't a great way to get there.
It's within an extension.
Yeah, it would get pretty messy pretty quick, but
no, that's super awesome. And obviously the force re-execute is super essential if in fact you change something in the beginning or somewhere along the line and you wanted to see how that change affected the entire script, not just what's changed in the path. Yeah. Right? How does that work with frozen nodes? Would it show them as not executed?
Yeah, if you freeze a node before you run anything in the tune-up, basically it says not executed on this run, and it just keeps it at that state of no value, unless you previously ran it, in which case it will continue to tell you what that piece was. So back when I was digging into element binding, most recently, because I always wind up having to go back and do that again and again and again, I used tune-up, and I didn't want to have to wait for this big complex set of element bound nodes to sort of rerun itself, right? Because for anybody who's not aware, element binding is the process through which an element previously created by Dynamo will be updated to new information rather than a new element placed that's basically a duplicate, right? So you can imagine sort of the classic example, and we used to see these once every few months doing support cases where someone would be like, somehow I was running this Dynamo graph and it's supposed to place a smoke detector outside of every bedroom, right? And a very common thing in residential design, right? Because it's a code requirement and people spend hours doing that. So yeah, let's automate this. And then people will run it and they broke element bindings because they didn't want it to happen, and they'd hit run and they're not seeing it because of a view template. And so they hit run again and they're still not seeing it because of a view template, and they hit run again and they hit run again and they hit run again. And before we know it, we've got 15 duplicate smoke detectors on top of each other that nobody can see, or the user just hasn't seen yet. And then they wind up changing the view and they're like, oh, it's already there. I guess I'm all set. But they don't know that they've introduced all those warnings into the model. So element binding prevents that, but it can be a little bit slower because it means you have to sort of check to see for all the content you've created before, the GUIDs for those elements get saved into the graph, and your Dynamo graph, when you run it, it has to unpack those GUIDs and then go hunting in your Revit model for those GUIDs, and then associate the previously created element to that node as if you had run the graph before. So it can be a little bit slow. However, it's hugely beneficial, you know, in that same example of creating the smoke detectors. What if the layout of the rooms change? Do you want to have to go through and manually delete everything? Do you want to have to go through and manually run that? Probably not. Just run the same graph you ran before and it'll relocate it. But that only works if it's managed. Neither here nor there. It's a bit slow. And so I use TuneUp to sort of understand what does that slower mean, which was pretty good. With frozen nodes as well, actually. So run it once with frozen, or when it runs on frozen, freeze it, see what the time is, and then run it again.
A few things come to mind while you're opening the file. First off, we could look at rooms that only have the name room, right? For the one that you're running, right? Like, yeah, we could filter down the rooms that essentially have already been renamed, right? Just give me the rooms that have the value of room as their room name. Another thing that I would probably do if I were running this script, especially within production in a work shared model, is filter it by level so that the user would actually only be interfacing with one level at a time. This would not only make the script run much faster, it would also make coordination much easier, right? That user isn't having to go around and coordinate hundreds of rooms and ensure that their numbers are right. They're just looking at the plan that they have open to ensure that those numbers are right. So a few little tricks there that I've come up with along the way to maybe make the scripts run a little bit faster or run a little bit smoother, not update the things that you don't want to update, etc.
Yep.
So, but all really wonderful things that I know I'm very excited to see, and I'm sure the audience as well is very excited to see. And some of those things that, of course, we've seen in Grasshopper. I'm not a Grasshopper user, but I know that there are ways of tracking the length of time that different nodes take to run and different things like that. So always wonderful to see those types of improvements.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff coming on that front too. Another big thing that I'm really excited for is sort of the 2022 opened up the Sketch API, which is huge, right? Because it means we can now create things that we couldn't create before, right? So not only are we able to understand what,
and essentially where we can Sketch API, it's like things that require edit boundary.
Yeah.
Right?
So,
like anything that you have to click edit boundary to get into that kind of like a pink line atmosphere.
Yeah, exactly. When you see that, the pink line atmosphere. And so basically what it is the Sketch sort of environment in Revit. First, we define a work plane because anything that we're going to sort of draw as a 2D sketch has to have a plane in space. The classic example of this is floors, right? So if I want to make a floor, I'm going to associate that floor to a level. That level happens to have a flat plane associated to it, right? So there we go. We're going to use that particular aspect. And so the Sketch API basically opens up the manual aspect where I could double click on that piece and add new lines to that floor. So if we wanted to put an opening inside of the floor, we couldn't really do that before. Now we can. We don't have sort of any great nodes necessarily to show this feature yet, but If you follow along the Dynamo for Revit GitHub, you'll have seen that, hey, there's some new nodes that I can't find in my Dynamo for Revit just yet. However, I can find those on this GitHub, which make no purchasing decisions based on any forward-thinking statements, like water, all things may change. However, when you look at that actual content, one would imagine that that might be something that's coming in a future Revit or Dynamo for Revit release, which we happen to know will be bundled with a future Revit release. So we're going to start to see some of those other sort of cool aspects.
And luckily, no purchases necessary because Dynamo's free.
This is true. We're just going to build this one a little bit live on the fly because I like to live dangerously. So you can see I'm back in the model. Let me actually do a save as, or yeah, we'll just do a save. I'll overwrite it, whatever. I've got a record I can report back to. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to grab all my guest baths. And if I take any one of these guest baths right now and zoom extents, or sorry, scope box, clip it, you can see, let's turn on our annotation categories so we can maybe see that scope box. There is no ceiling. We go straight up to the deck, right? And pardon my modeling errors. I didn't want to have to draw a million walls, so I just drew them once and then let them run through, knowing I could clean that up with some automation later. But there's no ceiling in there. And our floor to floor height is 12 feet. So let's say in our guest baths, we wanted to put in a ceiling. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab the default ceiling type. And this is from the rhythm package from John Pearson. So John Pearson makes the monocle view extension, 60-second Revit on Twitter, and he's got a great blog, works at Parallax team. Great guy, love his work. Anytime I get to show it off, I'm like, yeah, let's do it. But so he's put some nodes together that are going to allow us to do some really interesting stuff. So under Revit in Rhythm, under Elements, and then under Ceiling, we can get our default ceiling type, and then we can see this node right here, which is going to take a list of curves, a ceiling type, and a level. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say select model element. We can go ahead and we can grab that guest bath. I'm just going to select this node, this level by that means. So from here, I'm going to use Clockworks room.boundaries node, which gets me a list of curves. And I'm going to wire that list of curves into this ceiling type by level. And we'll go back to my ugly 3D view and we'll see what happens here. From target of an invocation. Well, that's a fun error. This is why we love live demos.
New one for me.
Is it a list, perhaps? Let's try wrapping that in a list and see what happens. There it goes.
There we go.
So now my ceiling's been created. And this is something we've never been able to do before, right? And once that's been created, we can start to make kind of those extra changes. So from here, we can pull the parameters for that ceiling, and then we can start to modify that content, right? So the offset from level right now is 8 feet. If we wanted that ceiling at 9 feet, that parameter value by name for element, the parameter name is height offset from oh, come on. There we go, height offset from level, and then let's try setting that to 9. And I'm pretty sure this isn't a read-only parameter. Yeah, there we go. And that just shifted up, right? So if I undo this, which is pretty cool.
Absolutely.
So now instead of having to go back and have an intern go through and click, you know, ceiling by room, ceiling by room, ceiling by room, ceiling by room. I have 1,600 rooms in this hotel project. think about the insanity of that? Well, we can now automate that, which is really, really cool.
And of course, build in some logic like you did with your room numbering script, right? So all the guest bathrooms could be a certain type and a certain height, your bedrooms, etc.
Yeah,
based
exactly.
off of the nomenclature.
Yeah, and we can get, because it just takes a curve loop, we can actually get even more elaborate than that. We could start to say, actually, I want to have sort of a raised ceiling kind of in the bedroom zone, a lowered ceiling at the entry. Let's go ahead and let's model that soffit wall while we're at it. Oh, and we're going to need a soffit at the window in order for our blackout curtain, and that whole crazy curtain track that has to go into every hotel ever. I know it's been like a year and a half for most of us since we've seen a hotel, but we all remember the really, really heavy shades that are so difficult to maneuver.
And absolutely, I see that as like a really great workflow, Dynamo player that, you go in, you renumber all your rooms, place all your ceilings, change the ceiling heights. I guess one thing that comes to mind in terms of something that could break that would be a donut-shaped room, right?
Yes. I don't believe John's code right now, and I don't know, we could try that, but I don't
So we
believe the
probably
code.
have to omit rooms with more than one curve loop.
Correct. Yeah,
and then push those through so that we don't get any errors, and then it fails everything within our script, right?
Now, what's interesting about that is the Sketch API will eventually enable those multiple curve loops, but I don't believe the rhythm node exposes that right now. And I haven't hacked together my own exploration through Python or something to sort of see what's possible there on the
right. Or, within the Dynamo, take the first list, right, from your elements, from your room boundaries, and then force that over, and then maybe the second list you could force over to an opening of some kind, right?
Yeah.
There's logic that you could put in there.
There's always a way to make it happen. Yeah. The other thing that's, it's not necessarily new, but there's been a lot of really big changes, and I get asked about it probably more often than I get asked about general Dynamo stuff, is generative design. So the cool thing with generative design is we are seeing a lot more users sort of start to dip their toes into the water there. Be it, I want to optimize, placements of buildings on a site, or if we wanted to sort of get into more elaborate stuff. And what I am sort of most excited for in that, let me see if I can actually open up another custom node or custom graph here. So I've opened this graph. This is a generative design graph that, again, it's another one of those common demos that I put together. The idea is to place 2 cabins on a wooded lot. And this graph, the inspiration for this graph actually came from a Dynamo forum where somebody had said, I have these dots, they're moose, and I have to figure out where to put buildings on a site to avoid moose. And I was like, I doubt they're moose. I'm going to think of them as trees or something like that. But yeah, funny story. If you search moose in the Dynamo BIM forum, you can sort of see the province of this graph. But so 2 different buildings that we want to place on site. We're not sure where they're going to want to be. So I'm in automatic run mode. So you can see when I adjust these values, the buildings will move on site. Also not entirely sure what the rotation wants to be. So we need to be able to adjust that rotation. Also not entirely sure what the sort of addition size is. So you can see on the red box here, which is building 1, the shape is sort of changing as I adjust that number slider. The main body also wants to be able to change, and the location of the addition around the larger building mass wants to change as well. So we've got some different number sliders for the different parts and pieces. But the cool new features in generative design is when we come up here, we've got this new generative design tools, which pops open this piece. It's a much sort of smoother workflow, and WebEx is putting things on top of my buttons. But you can see here, I've already sent this out. I could update the study type. We can quickly list through all the different issues, similar to what we had with the tune-up extension, so we can sort of quickly find where the problems are. But in any case, we can update the study type right there. And basically all the controls are now sort of here, as opposed to before with the old generative design. You'd have to come in here and say generative design, export for generative design, and you had this whole other UI that just kind of got in the way. But then the other cool thing here is, if I wanted to create a study, and this is probably the biggest aspect, and of course it's launching on the wrong window, we can add new folders, right? So if I didn't want to see that, I could just remove it. And now I'm left with just sort of the defaults. But if I wanted to add a folder, so if you had a network folder that had a bunch of great generative design graphs and you wanted to sort of enable those for mechanical, and another folder that had graphs for electrical, another for architecture, for landscape, for whatever it may be, you could just add in those folders and it's gonna, allow you to navigate to them. And then you can just change over to which version you kind of want to run with.
Why isn't Dynamo Player like this?
Dynamo, make no purchasing decisions with Dynamo Player is something that is currently in somebody's backlog.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness.
Great thing with this, and we only have 20 minutes, so I won't go ahead and kick off a run, is when it's done, you just say, okay, we're good to go, and you get some great examples that we can then bake out into our Revit model, right? Like this building happens to magically avoid all the trees on site, and the two buildings are as far apart as possible, and I'm pretty close to 1,800 total square feet, which is what the customer wanted to build. So we're really starting to see people adopt that more and more. And I think it's sort of the typical, I refer to it as the annual lag, where we release new tools. Everybody wants to know about what's new in those tools, but then it takes them a year before they finally get to start using those tools because their current projects are still in Revit, 2 years back or a year back or whatever it may be, and then they start the new stuff up, and we start to see that goodness, which is pretty cool.
And that's super exciting, and to see the integration in that is ideal. I think one of the bigger aspects that we're seeing change within the new Dynamo interface and API within the Dynamo 2.1 is Python 3.
Yes,
right?
Python 3 is the other huge thing.
Are you looking for that? It seems like there's a lot of behind the scenes kind of performance related things that we're not necessarily going to experience, right? Like the geometry nodes and their performance being much better, added geometry nodes with polycurves and solids and different things like that in terms of the interop behind the scenes.
Yeah, lots of stuff actually happening on that front, which is pretty cool. We're seeing a big effort from the Dynamo team in terms of getting geometry performance enhancements and stuff like that going, which is, for me, always huge. Anytime we can make geometry faster or work more consistently or whatever else you may have, I get really, really, really excited because that one geometry enhancement might fix a workaround that I have to show somebody how to implement 3 times a month. And if I'm not showing somebody how to implement that, what do I get to play with instead? And this is, I'll do another sort of share on this. So this is my initial sort of proof of concept. I wrote this back in, let me actually find the date for you here, November 4th of last year, because again, Dynamo sort of, the development sequence is out of time with what we see with the Revit, right? Revit, we get an annual cycle. Dynamo will release a new version of Sandbox. 2.11 is out as a stable build now. So you can go consume 2.11 and start playing with those new features today. You won't be able to use it in Dynamo for Revit or Dynamo for Civil or anything else, but you can see what's possible. So I try to take the time to do that 3 or 4 times a year. But what I've done here is I've got this little bit of Python script, which is now in Python 3 instead of Python 2. And because it's in Python 3, I can play with some cool new tools such as NumPy and computer vision. So this is OpenCV and NumPy.
You're speaking gibberish.
I am, but computer vision, Computer vision, what it is it's the same stuff that allows a Tesla to identify a stop sign, right?
Okay.
We need to be able to take an image that's been processed from a photo or a video, sort of figure out where the shape outline for that particular piece is, map that shape outline to all the list of shapes that we've ever seen before that are important to us. Obviously, stop sign's a pretty good piece. Anytime we see an octagon on a like popsicle stick, we know that's probably a stop sign, and we probably want to stop the car when we get to the right distance from that piece, right? What are the potential applications for that for architecture? Well, it winds up it's kind of huge, because when you guys get a new project in, what's the first thing that people do, right? They go looking for their pen and pencil and take out the trace paper, and they start to use this, right? That's basically what this is going to allow us to translate. We can take those initial contours. In my case, we'll go ahead and we'll hit run. We can read those contours through and generate vector art directly, right? And we can be smart about manipulating that vector art. So in this case, and it reads in upside down because, again, this was an initial proof of concept and I haven't had time to do it. I've read through the sketch of this bear, and you can see the different shapes and the outlines that have been provided. And if I wanted to, I can go back and, we can take all of these. I was trying to make filled regions from this. That was probably, see if that worked. Probably not, because I wasn't in a plan view. Yeah, that's not going to go ahead and work. Let's try changing it back to a plan view over in Revit. We'll run this again and see if we get some filled regions, sort of documenting our bear over on the Revit side of things.
It's reading an image over on the left?
Yeah, the original source image is, I drew this in Sketchbook one day because I was interested.
It's a vector-based image?
No, it's pixels.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's what's really, really pretty epic about this. Hey, look at that. I've made 33 filled regions from that sketch. And yeah, it's not a great sort of filled region necessarily to make. And things are in the kind of the backwards order. We've got pieces on top of pieces, but you can see when I select it, his arms are there. We lost a little bit of detail on the fingernails, but that's what happens when you wind up sort of reading up to the black line as opposed to the entirety of the black line. So potential applications for this. What does the landscape want to look like, right? Like, how many times do your landscape designers actually draw straight lines that are easily made into polygons, right? Like, never. Well, guess what? Somebody can sit down with their iPad and Sketchbook or whatever, sketch manipulation program they want to use, read that content into Dynamo and directly drive that content through. Also opens the door to all sorts of sort of machine learning applications as well, which is going to be really cool.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jacob. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with the audience?
My biggest thought, and sort of the thing I tend to tell people all the time, is keep experimenting, keep playing around, see what you can do with your different stuff, and borrow inspiration beyond just AEC, because there's lots of cool stuff going on in AEC, but there's lots of cool stuff going on outside of there too. So if you look at what your friends and contacts are doing in manufacturing and stuff like that, because the technology that Dynamo is exposing now really is going to sort of allow you and anybody else to do great new things that weren't really possible before. You'd have to wait for, my employer, Autodesk, or somebody else to come through and build up a really big sort of bold solution that sort of fixes everything, and maybe that gets you everything you need. Maybe it only gets you part way. Now you can start to shape your own tools and build your own, as opposed to waiting for somebody to hand you what you need. So keep doing that, and good things are going to happen.
Well, I'm super excited for what the future holds. Thank you so much. Always great chatting with you.
Yeah, anytime.
I'm sure we'll chat soon.
Yep.
Thank you all for watching Danamo Done.